welcome to Real Clear Fetish Talks Real Clear Play. I've dressed up for the occasion because it is the episode final of season 4. So I will be doing a break after this episode. But I'll bring my guest in. We are at the end of the season, so we are going to San Francisco today. So I have my guest. Welcome to the live.
Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely, absolutely. How are you doing?
Doing great. It is a beautiful day in San Francisco, sunny, 70s. It's kind of perfect.
Fantastic, fantastic. We'll jump into the 4 standard questions and then we'll just see where the conversation goes.
Okay.
Fantastic. What do you prefer I call you? Names, pronouns, and title?
Just call me Race. I don't ever attach titles of any sort to myself unless I'm in some sort of a dynamic with somebody. He, him would be my pronouns.
Fantastic. And tell me a little bit about yourself.
I have been in the scene since I was 17 and going to leather bars underage. I actually was bartending in a sleazy gay bar underage, unbeknownst to the owner. So I've kind of been deep in it from a very early age. Born in Chicago, that's where I was attracted to leather at the infamous Gold Coast Bar. And I was pretty much of a lone wolf for a very long time. By that I mean I operated very solo, no clubs, no organizations, nothing highly organized, probably until I moved to Los Angeles in 1980, stumbled into an organization there called Avatar Club Los Angeles. And through a series of events, I started to teach and I started to talk and I started to write about kink, and the rest just kind of took off from there. Fantastic. So I've been doing it a long time.
Completely sober, clear-headed, or social drinker?
My substances of choice, should I decide, are usually pot and wine. So that's with rare exception, that's as strong as I get.
Fantastic, fantastic. What is clear play to you and why is it important?
Clear play. Everyone involved in the scene, whether that is a social scene or an actual playroom scene, because I think we kind of play in public more so than most do with our dynamics and etc. That everyone is consenting and everyone is clear-headed and can make the appropriate decisions for themselves and others. That's clear play to me.
Yeah, it is important that I think the word of the time at the moment is consent, where when you're not clear-headed, it's hard to have 100% consent.
It's absolutely true.
Fantastic. So you started on the kink scene at 17. How did that come about? What sparked your interest to start with?
I have been tying up my friends and spanking them and doing things to them since I was 8 or 9 years old. I had a regular neighbor when I was 9, he was 8, would come over to my house once a week and I would spank him. And we did that for 2-3 years. I used to be the guy when we were playing kid games where I would tie other kids up to trees. And now, did I know what I was doing exactly? No, I had no idea why I was attracted to that. But it's pretty clear that from a very young age, kink of some sort was attractive. I also knew I was gay very young. I was attracted to, boys my age by the time I was 7, 8, 9. And then one day when I was coming up from college, I was going to university about 100 miles south of Chicago, which is where I'm from. I came up and stumbled on a gay bar called the Glory Hole in Chicago that I ended up working at eventually. That's the sleazy bar I was talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And the second bar I stumbled into by sheer accident, or maybe it was by pheromones, I don't know, was the Gold Coast.
Yeah.
And for those who don't know, the Gold Coast is one of the most infamous leather bars of all time. And I walked in and said to myself, I'm home. This is it. This is what I've always wanted. And I was 17 at the time. So it just always drew me in right from the beginning.
What was it about? Like, I know you mentioned rope, but was there any like particular gear you're mostly attracted to? Is it mainly leather your main kink, or fetish gear? Would that be your main one to go to?
Ooh, it is, but I am always very candid and honest when I tell people that a lot of the gear I wear is because when you want to catch a duck, you walk and talk and dress like a duck. And the men that I wanted to catch, the men that I wanted to play with and socialize and be around were geared. And I didn't have a lot of money when I was younger. And luckily at the time, so we're talking the very early 70s, there was leather and there was gear, but we called them leather Levi bars for a reason, because a lot of the guys in the bars were just there in a very kind of butch aesthetic, even if it wasn't leather or other kinds of official fetish gear. And I was one of those guys. I was one of the Levi guys. I was boots, belt, maybe a vest, white t-shirt rolled up, jeans, and kind of messed up Levi jacket. And that was my garb of choice for a long time. And eventually, I ended up very early on, when I first entered the scene, I ended up playing with a very good leather maker. And so I ended up with a vest and all these things that I would not have probably been able to afford at the time. And I feel really bad for young people today trying to buy some of the gear, because it is not cheap.
No, what I'm wearing at the moment is probably the most expensive thing I own, and I only got that recently, and that's after years of saving up. So definitely, it's a really expensive fetish, but if you get the right gear and the right quality, it lasts you a lifetime. So
it's true. It's absolutely true. But I do try to be sensitive to younger folks and people that don't have tons of money, allowing them to express their fetish in any way that works for them, because I do think that it's tough economically to do some of this stuff.
Oh, absolutely. I'm fairly aware that I wear something not everyone can afford, and it's how I'm being able to afford it. I have absolutely no clue. But it's just budgeting and saving, and maybe just one less night out and once in a while instead, and just put that money aside. So, but yeah, it's not all about the brands. It's not all about a certain look, especially if you're starting out.
Yeah, no, it's true. And I encourage people to just sort of add as they can. There's the tradition of gifting and exchanging gear, and here in San Francisco we try to do that as much as we can, because it's an expensive city to live in, and buying the gear is that much more expensive because of it. London and many other cities have the exact same problem of price. So I think as long as someone kind of makes an effort to dress in the way that expresses their fetish best, I'm all for it.
When you mentioned the whole Levi guy, when you started going out and so on, it reminds me of a little story. First time I was in San Francisco, back in 2010, we went to a bluff meet at the Eagle. And I think us Europeans, we're quite gear centric and like do the full outfit, and no, like we don't hold back. And it's like, we come here to be like full gear. And I remember walking in with my partner at the time, and the room was just filled with Levi guys. I was like, where are all the bluff men?
Yeah,
But then we realized
yeah,
actually Levi's and leather jackets is fairly normal in the States, where it's not something we see very often here.
yeah. It's Bluff, San Francisco in particular has seen a bit of a revival. They've had
Mm.
parties once or twice a month at the Eagle, and they host a big dinner around Happy Rally, aka Dory Alley Street Fair weekend,
Mm.
and um, we've seen a bit of a resurgence in full gear. That said, you're absolutely correct. Americans generally are not as traditionally gear centric in the same way Europeans are. And so when it's not uncommon for an American kinkster to go over to Berlin and walk up to a door and they say, you know, you're not really dressed right for this bar or this club. And I'm all about honoring whatever the customs are of the era. But we warn guys that go to Europe that, you know, bring a good full gear outfit because you're going to fit in a lot better if you do.
We do go for the full Tom of Finland fantasy if we
Yep.
can, absolutely over here. So
and,
yeah,
and Tom would love that.
absolutely. I'm sure he would absolutely love it. It's definitely in his spirit that we do it over here. So yeah, it's. I have one of his drawings now from the our poster from Backstreet. Now, unfortunately, our last standing leather club here in London closed recently. The
I
Backstreet.
know.
So it's really really sad.
It is sad, and believe me, the Americans were sad too because that's where they like to go when they went. And speaking of Tom, right behind here is a print of the last image he did, which I believe he called "A Perfect Man," which has no gear or whatever. It's just a beautiful torso of a man.
Mm.
Tom was an amazing guy, a very sort of quiet, lovely spirit that had a really kinky mind.
Did you actually meet him?
I did down at the Foundation House in Los Angeles. Dirk Daner introduced me, and really nice, much more quiet and to himself man than I would have expected. But maybe that's the artist. Maybe his kink came came alive through his pencil and his art. But yeah, really, really lovely man.
Fantastic, fantastic. That must have been quite something to meet kind of
Yep,
that
it
legend.
was.
Um,
It's meeting an idol.
absolutely. I would be starstruck if I'd actually had the chance to meet him. Absolutely. So you say you, like in your description when you wrote to me, just like you're an organizer, writer, educator, speaker, activist, LGBTQ, leather, kink, polyamory, HIV, STI prevented realm since 1975. It's quite a list of things you do.
Yeah.
Where do you get to drive to do all these things? Because I do the sober kink stuff, and that can be hard work sometimes, just that one little section, but you kind of cover a whole umbrella of things.
Yeah, I was kind of part of the Gay Liberation Front before we even had the LGBTQ acronyms, and it was just called the Gay Liberation Front back in the day. So what I will call queer politics has always been extremely important to me. And so that was concurrent with my leather kink life beginning as well. So I kind of came out of the gate, very gay and very kinky right off the bat. They kind of were simultaneous. And so queer politics and anything having to do with leather and kink and fetish. I tend to use those three words, by the way, interchangeably because Americans tend to think of it as leather community. Europeans seem to use fetish more often than they do leather, and kink seems to be becoming the universal. So I kind of use all three interchangeably so I don't miss anybody. I've always been interested in public health, so I've done a lot around HIV, which started, of course, early on because of the HIV epidemic, and as a natural outgrowth of that, I became very interested in gay men's public health, specifically around STIs and things like that. I was a big national advocate for PrEP when before PrEP kind of became a thing, and I was being pilloried by the right wing because I was,
Yeah.
and polyamory is something that I've always been polyamorous in some way, and so even back when we didn't have a language for polyamory,
Yeah.
that was a thing, and I think leather families were kind of an example of that. And so when we started to codify polyamory, became non-monogamy, polyamory, etc., became a big deal and was starting to get more press. I became much more active in that realm as well. So, and I work a lot in local San Francisco politics with various candidates, and I just stay busy. I just like doing stuff.
Well, I'm getting the impression, definitely. So you mentioned like you got involved with the HIV in the start of, I'm assuming in the start of the 80s when the AIDS crisis started. How look, just let's do a comparison. How did you feel like? How do you think with what's been going on with monkeypox and how local health organizations are being treating it as a gay thing, and of course not the same category as of severity. No one's dying from it. It's unseemly and not nice to have, but no one's dying from it, of course. So I'm just going to make it clear that's not how I'm comparing this. But you kind of think we're so far down the line, but now we have again, it's being stamped as a gay sexual transmitted disease, and people are just not taking it as serious as possible that this can become a problem. How do you find that now, after all the work we've done since the 80s till now to convert stigma and so on? How do you find handling that now? Because it feels like a repeat in a way.
On some level, it is. Certainly, in some of the public health failures, it's a repeat. You're right. People are not typically dying from it, and it certainly doesn't have the ramifications that HIV did. But homophobia is strong, and even though the demographic that is initially being most impacted by monkeypox is men who have sex with men, as we have discovered with all viruses of any kind, they don't stick to one demographic very long usually.
No.
So I think it's been a public health failure generally here in the United States, and this is I happen to be a fan of the Biden administration big time, but in terms of our Health and Human Services or arm and Center for Disease Control that sort of initially was overseeing the monkeypox thing in the United States, I think they were flat-footed, and that led to them not being adequately prepared. That said, I think they're ramping up pretty well now. Hindsight is 2020.
You would think they would have gotten smarter by now.
Yeah, you would think. You would think, but even some of the smart ones aren't so smart about certain things. And I am lucky to live in San Francisco because the downside, of course, is we were one of the United States hotspots for monkeypox.
Yeah.
But the upside to that is that they threw a lot of vaccines our way. And I don't know a single person in my inner circle who was not already vaccinated for monkeypox. Not one that I can think of. And many have already gotten their second shot. So that's certainly speaking from I'll use a word I don't use that often, a place of privilege, because we're a fairly wealthy city that had a very high concentration of gay men. And because it was such a hot spot, they threw lots of vaccines here. There was lots of opportunity to get vaccinated. And guys they've been stepping up and getting vaccinated. But all that said, there is a comparison. The governments did not respond in a timely manner the way they should, and I honestly believe a lot of it is conscious or unconscious homophobia.
Yeah, it's definitely some of the same stuff we have over here. I would say San Francisco has taken it much more serious than the UK has. We literally yeah, it's only recently we've been able to get vaccines, and that's already run out for August. There's none left. So it's a disaster yet again. Literally, like everywhere else, it's like, but it's a gay thing, so it's not so important. We literally have people over here that believes that it only affects gay people, and it's just absolutely ridiculous.
The woman, when I got vaccinated, I have been vaccinated. The woman in front of me simply worked at a club with lots of people. You know, one of these clubs where there'd be raves and a lot of people, and not just gay people, with their shirts off and dancing and sweaty and hugging on each other because they were, you know, whatever. Yeah. And so she was very clear. She goes, "Oh no, I need this vaccine because I work around a lot of people where they're skin to skin." Yeah. And so I think there's an awareness that it can move easily outside of the demographic it's targeting right now, and sadly may. In San Francisco, our numbers are lucky. We're every week since July, the case numbers are going down. And I credit that to a great extent about some awareness about, you know, risk assessment individually, and also the fact that so many people, you know, got in line and got vaccinated. The day I got vaccinated for my first shot was, I don't know, 6 weeks ago, and there were over 500 people in line at 8 o'clock in the morning to get vaccinated on a weekday.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
That is,
yeah.
You know what, in the greater scheme of things, because we are engaged and because we are taking care of our health, the straight populace are probably not even going to be affected that much from it, because we are stamping it down before it becomes a problem.
It's probably true. Yeah, I think that's an accurate prognostication about where it's going to go, is that because we are containing it. And I say that's because gay men do take care of themselves, contrary to what many would like to believe. Mm-hmm. We're the first to step up and get vaccinated. During the HIV crisis, we were the first to step up and codify risk assessment and safer sex behaviors and all that kind of stuff. So we do take care of our own and ourselves. And so I think you may be right. I think we may be nipping it in the bud well enough, at least in the States, I think we are, to avoid it creeping out too much into the rest of the population. I don't know if they have begun using the 1/5 dose protocol in Europe yet, but here in the United States we are.
I think we are, because we don't have enough vaccines, so they would rather just vaccine more people than not have like a smaller group vaccinated, and they would rather have a bigger with a less vaccine. Yes, so I think there has been chat about that over here. Yeah.
Yeah, they're doing it here, and it is stretching the vaccine to the point where everyone I know that's wanted to get vaccinated has been able to get vaccinated, at least with their first shot.
So going back to like the HIV crisis, where were you in the world when that kind of started? I think it's something that's very important to talk about, and especially in the last couple of years with the pandemic and so on, it's been much more on our radar. And I think also it's important to educate maybe the younger generation that didn't have that impact of it. Where were you in the world when that started, and how did it affect you?
I moved, I'm from Chicago, then lived in New York for a while, Manhattan, and then moved to Los Angeles in 1980. And so I was in Los Angeles when the HIV crisis really took hold. I was lucky/unlucky in knowing the very first diagnosed person that I was aware of in Los Angeles. So I was extremely aware of HIV, or what we didn't have that name for it yet, very early on. And so I volunteered with the very first safer sex organization in Los Angeles, which was kind of how I began, you know, doing some of that work. But knowing the very first person that was diagnosed and eventually died had a tremendous impact on me, because I was aware of it in a way that I don't think many other people were until many, many months down the line when it became more of a widespread crisis.
Yeah, it's a little bit like with the pandemic. If no one had any effect from like COVID in their periphery, a lot of people was like, well, it's not that dangerous. I haven't seen anyone be affected by it. I can imagine having it so close into you from the get-go gave you, well, motivation to keep yourself safe and help as well. I couldn't imagine how that must have been.
I also think that the leather community, the fetish community, the kink community in the United States, at least, we were on the vanguard of trying to help other people adjust their sexual behaviors when at a time when we had no idea what was really going on except sex was doing it. And so being kinky, we had lots of options. We showed people lots of options. Some of the very first safer sex pamphlets and guides came from, to a large extent, the leather community, or at least a lot of leather community input. You can do this as an alternative to insertive sex, and this and this and all these things we've been doing for years. Now you can try it too. And so I think the leather community, the fetish kink community in the United States at least, was very early in helping the rest of the men, specifically gay men's community mostly, in the beginning, adjust behaviors in such a way as to reduce the impact as much as possible. So I was pretty aware of it pretty early, and so were most leather people.
It's definitely the impression that like a lot of the first responders, if you can call it that, was leather community, and the people who were the nurses were the lesbian community that kind of stepped in, especially at least here in the UK. If you watched It's a Sin, you just see most of the nurses that's portrayed in that series is lesbian women stepping in and helping their gay brothers. It was quite eye-opening, especially someone with I was a child in the 90s, so it was on my periphery and I saw commercials for it, but it was not the same magnitude as anything. I just knew it was dangerous, but I didn't maybe get the same dose of terror from it, maybe. I think I mentioned in previous episode that my first impression of HIV and hospice life, if they're at the end of the life, was through Beverly Hills 90210. There's where there's an episode where Kelly volunteers at a hospice for HIV positive people, and that was probably my first kind of thing I got thrown in my face when it came to that type of stuff. Well, I must have been 12 at the time when that episode came out, but it was completely inaccurate about testing and how long it takes and stuff like that. It was completely fabricated, but it was a very important episode because it portrayed that, at least in Denmark it was for me.
Related to what you just said, you're absolutely correct. Lesbians stepped up and took care of their gay men brothers, and in a big way. And in every city in which I'm aware there was any kind of a true supportive presence, they were there. So that's absolutely true, and I think that that's well documented, and we need to sort of honor that they did take care of us at a time when we really needed it. The other thing is that because the leather kink fetish community is and was so highly sexual, we were impacted disproportionately compared to other parts of the gay community. So not only did we have the skill sets because of our kink to help people not necessarily become infected at the time, but we had a lot of friends and lovers and people we knew die. I mean, it was somewhat later, but my first partner died of AIDS. So I was very aware on an intimate level of the tragedy that it could bring about. So I think we should be applauded as a leather kink fetish community responding so well to it and helping others, but it also devastated us in a way that we hear all, I'm an old guy, and so I'm always, people throw around this word elder and mentor and all these things, and I'm not sure that really works for me all the time, but but there aren't as many of us because so many of us died. A
Yeah.
lot of people my age are dead. And therefore, there was a whole layer of the community that was gone. And a lot of organization skills, knowledge, um, skill sets, you name it, went with them. So I think HIV impacted the leather community in different ways, and that was one of them too.
Yeah, it's but as I said before, it's so important to share stories, and thank you for sharing that. It does mean a lot, especially for someone like me, to learn about the history and different experiences when it came to this. And I'm hoping someone listened as well on this, because it's important.
I just want to add one thing, and that is that if anyone's wondering about whether they're HIV negative and they should go on PrEP, I'm here as a long-standing advocate of PrEP. Please talk to your doctor. Please consider it. It really works. It doesn't have a lot of side effects. It really does keep you from becoming HIV positive. And as somebody myself who was HIV positive and have been positive since the mid-'80s, and I was very lucky. I was a slow progressor. I didn't even have to go on meds for a long time, but I am on meds now. If somebody does seroconvert, the wisdom now is absolutely go on medication quickly to bring your viral load down. It's generally considered through all the research to help you in the long run with your health. So I happen to be one of the lucky ones that was a slow progressor, and I'm healthy as a horse and have gobs of T cells, but I realized that something in my genetics was just lucky. Yeah. So please get on PrEP if you're negative. If you do test, get on drug, medications right away.
Talking about PrEP, how you say you're an advocate for it. How do you feel? Because a lot of there was the people for and against, because a lot of people maybe use PrEP as an alternative to condoms. Of course, it doesn't prevent you from getting everything else. How do you feel about those type of things?
I'm a very data-driven person, and I wrote in some of the op-eds that I would write with another friend of mine, a therapist here in town named Luke Adams. We would crunch the data, and even back when people thought people were using condoms, a lot of people were not using condoms. So you have to accept reality that a lot of people were not using condoms, even in an era when they wouldn't necessarily admit that they weren't using condoms. So that's data. That's solid data. You can't ignore it. And I am absolutely an advocate for condoms for those who want to use them. We have to also be real and understand that most guys are not using them. They aren't. And now that PrEP is here, they are not. And I'm not going to judge one way or the other, but I think that the vast majority of gay men are not that have access to PrEP. They are getting tested quarterly, something I think is extremely important. PrEP protocol here in the States typically is you have to see your doctor and be tested for STIs every 3 months, which is way more than most gay men do. I'm a big advocate for regular STI testing. Yeah. So I'm a realist. I look at the data. I also look at what is the balance between pleasure and caution. And I think that everyone has a risk assessment. And many people have come to the decision that I'm on PrEP. I'm comfortable barebacking. I know that my partner is hopefully getting checked. I'm getting checked. It doesn't prevent everything. You can always have a blip, but everyone has to make that assessment for themselves, and I don't judge any assessment one way or the other.
Yeah, I talk to someone who uses PrEP, and I have made the decision I don't necessarily use condoms. If I'm with someone who prefers me to use a condom, of course I will use a condom. That's not a problem. I'm not completely adverse to condoms. It's just not something I ever used. I stopped using condoms in my drug addiction because when you're high, it's not on your radar. And to be honest, before, when I was still using condoms, and it sounds maybe a little bit silly, is I was so panicky every time a broken condom happened, or it didn't quite fit, or I forgot to use it, I would just go on eggshells around sex. And to be honest, when it kind of, I accepted the risk, not necessarily wanting to be positive, definitely not. I never wanted to become positive, but I think I accepted the calculated risk from it, especially in my drug addiction. I don't know if it was a good decision or not at the time, but it was just what it was. But it definitely gave me a bit more freedom, a bit more sound of mind, and less anxiety around sex, where I had it before. Prep, as soon as I could get on it, I was on it because I was in a risk group. How I managed to get out of my drug addiction without becoming positive, I have absolutely no clue, because I was definitely in a high risk group. But then again, I always asked, even at my worst with drug taking, I would always ask my partners their status. And in most cases, if I was barebacking with someone, I wouldn't necessarily bareback with someone who was negative that didn't know their status, but I would bareback with someone who was positive on meds, because the risk is minimal, because undetectable is untransmittable.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely true. We also progress in science and medical science so that people have better lives. And there are some, I'll just say it, some guys my age and older who were a little bitter that they lived through an entire era where it was, you use a condom every time or you might die.
Yeah.
You know, that was the reality. And now, of course, with PrEP, that is not the case. As well as undetectable is untransmissible. So I think this is a wonderful thing that people coming into the scene today have these options. I'm not bitter at all that we had to make adjustments that they may not have to make today, or certainly have less risk around those decisions. The other thing I want to say, in case we don't get to it, is that the man I have collared for the past 10 years has been sober, and I'm probably going to get his sober birthday wrong, and he's going to be upset. But I want to say he's 38 years sober. Wow. It's a long time. It's 30-some. And so I am a huge champion of the sober community and the kinky, the leather, the fetish sober community in particular, because I think it's a good example of us taking care of our own. And if you go to International Mr. Leather or some of the other big events now, they didn't always have sober meetups, but now they have sober meetups. Or they'll have badges that will indicate that they're sober, so that when you're looking at a guy across the hall and you're like, I need to be with somebody who's sober, they immediately can look and go, oh, that guy is, and they can walk over, say hi or whatever. So I think we've reached a level of awareness around how important the sober community is and sobriety is to so many people. And thank you for doing that. Thank you for being an example of that, because we need more good examples of that.
Well, thank you. Do you know what? When I started RealClearFetish, and maybe also, well, the podcast I started in lockdown, mainly because there was nothing else to do. I started, and I've mentioned this before, I started it purely from my own way to get back into kink. Because I didn't know how to, because my sex drive and my drug taking was so intertwined. So how do you do something inherently sexual if you want to use drugs every time? And to be honest, the sober kink scene over here is more or less non-existent. I'm not saying that they're not around, but they maybe not be as loud speaking as me. But that was kind of my drive. It's like, well, if no one else is going to be a role model here in Europe, well, then I'll step up. I have no qualms with that. And I'm also quite an open book. So I have no secrets, particularly. Things like this, there's things I will keep private, but in general, it's like, if people ask me a question, I will answer as honestly as I can and I feel comfortable with. And this is one of my drives to do these chats, because it is important, and it's educational, and it's life affirming in a lot of things.
Also, and I'm not overstating this, you quite likely may be saving someone's life. So I will put, I think it's so important to have models. And if somebody doesn't step forward in the beginning and then somebody else says, oh, well, I feel that way too. And pretty soon you have a movement, a community, a sense of mutual support. You know, if somebody doesn't do it, it's not going to get done. So thank you for doing it. And I'm not understating it. You are likely saving probably more than one life by doing that.
Well, I hope so. That's kind of, I've always said, it's like, if I just make a change for one life, then it's all worth it, to be honest, all the work I do. So you also say that you're an author. You have published books in the past as well.
I have.
And there was one book that stuck out for me when I was looking at your page. Let me just have a quick look. There was a book that stuck out because I was learning the ropes, a basic guide to safe and fun BDSM lovemaking, version 2.
Yeah.
Well, how did you manage to write a book about that? I think it's amazing.
When a book, books have always been a passion. I've been a reader all my life, and so I was looking at books for leather people, kinky people, fetish people. And back in the day, my friend Graylin Thornton always says that phrase, so I always use it now. Back in the day, there weren't a lot of really good nonfiction books of quality around BDSM and kink. And in fact, the manual that I first looked at was I think it was the Lesbian SF Safety Manual. Well, I forgot, I'm saying the wrong name, but it was a book about lesbian kink, and it was one of the most authoritative works available. And I thought, well, wouldn't it be good if there was a book that was kind of a gentle introduction to SM, I called it at the time, now BDSM is the more accurate acronym. It was kind of a gentle introduction that appealed to people of all genders and all orientations and was very basic. And I wrote that, and I didn't even attempt to publish it through the normal means. I self-published it. And it's, to date, I'm not privy to all the numbers currently in front of me, but I want to say it sold about 85,000 copies so far, which is a lot of copies of books. And
there's a lot of kinky people out there.
There are a lot of kinky people. And when I was successful with that book, because I self-published it, my partner at the time was Guy Baldwin. And Guy was writing this wonderful column for Drummer Magazine. And I said, you need to put all these essays together in a book. And he was very reticent. And I said, no, you need to do this. And so that became the second book I published, which was Ties That Bind. And then one thing led to another, and I ended up becoming a book publisher. And I sold that company many years ago. But books have always been a passion. And I've always felt that my press at the time, Greenery Press, which is Janet Hardy's press that she started. She's famous for writing The Ethical Slut with Dossie Easton, amongst other things.
It's on my shelf, on my list to read. It's on my shelf in the kitchen to read because it's, as you mentioned, poly. It's a great book about polyamory. And I used to be in a triad relationship, so it's interesting to maybe read someone else's perspective on it.
Yeah, I've been in various configurations of triads and quads and things over my life, so it's always kind of how I've been wired. So yeah, I wrote that book. I write a lot of other things as well, but in the kink world, that's the book I'm sort of known for.
It's like with the triad and so on. It's sometimes when I talk to people and they start explaining their relationships, I almost go a bit cross-eyed. It's not me criticizing anyone's relationship, but sometimes it's like, oh, that sounds really, really complicated. I was just in a relationship with two married guys. That was the extent of my polyamory, if you could say, where sometimes you talk to someone, it's like, well, I'm a pup, but I have a sir, and my sir has his own daddy, and the daddy is now a slave to my other pup brother. And it just becomes like, you kind of need like a family tree to make sure you kind of get the whole dynamic. But I think it's amazing, and it's become much more popular, I feel, or maybe a bit more public now.
I think both. I think, I mean, my own poly situation is I have a partner of 31 years. The man I have collared for 10 years has a husband of 31 years and a boy of I want to say 7 or 8 years of his own. I mean, yeah, it's all very, and we have interests on the side that are more than just play buddies. So, yeah, I'm definitely wired. I do think it's become both more public and more popular. I think when people are exposed to options that they didn't know were possible before, they consider them in a way they never would have previously. And then there's also the people that have been functioning poly for a long time who now feel like they can be very out and open and discuss it with a wider range of people than they once could. So I think it's both more public and more popular, both at the same time. And if you look at the number of mainstream publications that have published some type of article on non-monogamy and or polyamory, it's astounding how popular a topic it is.
It is interesting to see that it's blossomed so much, and it's also become quite a big thing here in Europe with different types of dynamics in relationships now. Where when I was in a freeway relationship, I almost got like, oh, that's weird at the time. But like you say, it's when you get exposed to the idea, and it's like, oh, there is not just monogamy as an option. My friend, who I was a good fuck buddy of mine from Copenhagen, mentioned he'd been in a freeway relationship. I'd never ever considered that. And then I found the 2 guys I was with for 5 years, and before my friend had mentioned that you could do that, I would never considered it. I would just been heartbroken that I couldn't be engaged with one person because he was married to someone else. So it's definitely like representation is so important, and being honest and open and so on.
It's going to be a fascinating development to watch over time as polyamory and non-monogamy become more the norm. The norm's not the word. More an open option, unjudged. That may take a while, but when we get there, it'll be interesting to see where society balances. How many choose monogamy? How many choose non-monogamy? How many choose polyamory? When they have those options and they aren't nudged by religion and family and society and culture into one way of thinking. So I don't, that's probably not even going to be in my lifetime, but whenever that happens, it would be a really interesting thing to see, and just where we're going to balance out when when all those options are on the table.
Absolutely, absolutely. So you also, you write a lot. You write blogs online, and I also had a quick glance at your Pinterest.
Oh wow! I don't maintain that very well.
No, but it's a very interesting Pinterest. If anyone goes onto his Linktree and looks at his Pinterest, there's some very, very pretty men on there.
Yeah, there are. Yeah.
When I think when I think Pinterest, it's like family mums with recipes and decorations and stuff like that. It's not necessarily fetish men.
Yeah, well, I like my fetish men. I was very big on Pinterest when it first came on the scene. I've always been a big social media person, and so I was very good with my Pinterest for a long time, and it's only in the last actually few weeks that I've begun to kind of revive my interest in Pinterest. So it's interesting you picked that one out specifically, because my Twitter, my Facebook, my Instagram, etc. are much more current, whereas Pinterest is a little bit. But you're right, lots of pretty men.
That's a pretty man. But yeah, you are quite prolific. When you look at your Linktree, it's longer than my Linktree. Let's say it like that. You're more in tune with it than I am. And I mainly use Instagram as my main source of promoting stuff. But yeah, it's sharing that knowledge online is so important, and hopefully there is quite a few people who actually read a lot of this stuff, because it is this a wealth of knowledge on there.
You know, I always describe myself as a generalist, because even though a lot of historically what I've written about is kink, I write and do a lot of things outside of that as well. And I always say I'm a generalist. I read, I learn, sometimes I write about it. And that's, so there's almost no topic that I don't find fascinating. It's one of the reasons I started my Substack blog, because I can write about almost anything on that. And I do. I mean, I just, you know, climate change, kink, you know, politics. I mean, laundry list of things. And that's just how I am. I've been a voracious reader all my life. I grew up that way. Only child, sat with books a lot. I was very much a bookworm when I was younger. And I find almost all of life fascinating, and the desire to either write about it or discuss it, and on occasion it's something rises to the top and I feel like I need to do a project around it of some sort.
Yeah, it's quite fascinating. I need to sit down and read some of your stuff, because there is so much to get going with. You also now do a YouTube channel called the Guard Cigar Saloon. I had to get that out.
It's On Guard Cigar Salon.
There you go. Say that 10 times fast. How did that come about?
So during the pandemic, a relatively well-known kinkster by the name of Mr. Christopher, who has been a friend, been a friend of mine for decades, literally. We would sit in his partner Pup Amp's backyard during the pandemic, and it was usually me and Christopher and Christopher's sub, who goes by Pig, who's also on the show, and occasionally some others, and we would sit and talk about all sorts of stuff. It was outdoors, we could smoke cigars, and one day Christopher said, you know, we should record this. And so we did. We began to just have chats, smoking a cigar, and it started with just myself, Christopher, and Pig, and then soon thereafter, Graylin Thornton joined, and Pup Amp is always the production and the younger voice amongst the four of us, since the four of us are a little on the older side. I'm the oldest, I think, but we talk about anything kink and to some extent LGBTQ related. And each episode has a topical theme, a social issue, or something we want to talk about that's very specific. And then the conversation goes where it goes. Sometimes we don't know where it's going to go. It is not scripted in any way, shape, or form. It is entirely off the cuff. We just pick a topic. And now we have a guest occasionally. So people can visit onguardsalon.com. That's our URL, and we'll point you to our YouTube channel. And we actually have a new episode dropping this weekend. So I think this one's called Ask a Leather Daddy Anything. But
all the questions.
Don't quote me on the title.
Fantastic. And just to like mention, you mentioned Mr. Christopher and Pup Amp. They also do another show called What's the Safe Word, which is spelled What's, like with lightning, which is a brilliant YouTube channel as well, if anyone wants to check that out as well. But of course, also check on the Cigar Saloon as well. Absolutely.
Before Amp, I knew Amp. I knew about What's the Safe Word back when he used to do it out of Seattle, and he wasn't living here in San Francisco. And even then, it was the #1 place I pointed new kinksters to go for information. And I know it sounds self-serving because they're very close friends of mine, and I had sort of an alliance with What's the Safe Word. But to this day, I still point everyone there first, because it's non-sensationalistic, it's solid information,
Amp does a ridiculous amount of research on his topics. I mean, like, he's just, it's incredible. So I do think, and even though it's skewed toward gay men, a lot of the audience is women, heterosexual, people of all orientations and gender expressions. You know, so the material isn't just about gay kink; it's about kink generally.
Yeah.
So I highly recommend it.
Also, it's hilarious. It's so funny,
Yeah.
and they do some crazy episodes as well. There's the one where they order stuff from Wish, which is perfect. It's so funny, and their reactions to some of the gear they get on there, because it's horrible, absolutely horrible. If you're a start kinker, don't do it on there. Absolutely not. But it's really fun to do. But it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on. Anywhere people, if anyone's listened and they actually got want to know some more, where can they get a hold of you?
I am either Race Bannon or Bannon Race on almost all socials. So you can Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. You discovered Pinterest. I guess I need to keep that up now since people are looking at it. They can go to my two websites are not that well maintained. I will be honest. I'm upgrading them. I'm about to retire from corporate life next week, and so I'll have a lot more time in my life. So I'm going to upgrade both my sites, but Bannon.com and RaceBannon.com are sites you can go to. And if you go to most of my socials, my LinkedIn, my link tree is there, and it will point you to just about everything.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for coming on, and it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on.
Thank you very much for asking me.
Have a great day.
I will. Bye.
Bye. So that was the last episode. I'll let you have a full look at my outfit because it's the last time for this season. So have a good time, be safe, and see you in a couple of months. Bye.